I'm starting the recording, and I'm very happy to say good afternoon and good day to all of you, wherever you are. I'm very pleased to welcome in this series of talk and webinars a renewed Professor Bo Rothstein. In the invitation for this event, I described this as the professor of the quality of government. His work on these issues is outstanding, remarkable. As you will see here, he produced a lot of work on this issue. He works also on issues of trust, corruption, justice, fairness in government. Is one of the most cited political scientists in the world, highly cited, highly influential, and few things about his career. Is now emeritus, if I got it right, and he held the August Röhss Chair in Political Science at the University of Gothenburg, Sweden. There he was the co-founder of the Institute for the Quality of Government Institute. And this event is invitation for him and opportunity for us to speak on some of his works. 3 and maybe 4 of his most influential work will be discussed and presented by Bo. This is a giant. This is a demanding task to do all of them together. This is the first time that I'm trying to do it in a webinar. So it will be controlling corruption from Oxford in 2021, making sense of corruption from 2017. The quality of government from 2011, and also Oxford Handbooks of the quality of government. And this work on the quality of government is really pioneering, outstanding academically, and the institute that Bo created and the data set and the research that came out from his group is just amazing. So I'm highly recommending for you to visit it and to learn what you can do with it, and to continue the work that he and this group did. So thank you so much, Bo, and I appreciate your participation and the opportunity to have you with us. And please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David, for this invitation and your far too kind words about my work. I will try to share my slides here. Hope it works. Let's see.
Yeah.
Yes, I think
works.
so.
Yep.
A few words about the Quality of Government Institute. It started with a minor grant in 2004. And I've done this together with my esteemed colleague Søren Holmberg at the Department of Political Science, University of Gothenburg. Then we were successful and had a great pile of luck to get large grants from the Bank of Sweden, Tercentenary Foundation, the Wallenberg Foundation, the European Research Council, the EU 7th Framework Program, and also some private donations. So we've been running around on about 25 million euros during these years. We are about 25 active researchers. Since I retired, no longer the head of the operation. I'm just participating. We have what we think are the largest databases on this issue globally, and they are completely open access. And what are we doing? It's basically 3 main questions. What is quality of government? How should you define it? And I spent enormous amount of ink on this. The second question is, what do you get from high or low quality of government? And then, of course, the million-dollar questions: how do you move from low to high quality of government in a country or a region or a city? So I want to start by showing this book, the Oxford Handbook of Quality of Government, that I did with 3 colleagues. It's cross-disciplinary. We have economists, anthropologists, sociologists, historians in it. Several actually world-leading scholars are in it, but also quite a number of young and very promising ones. We think it is a state of the art about quality of government and how it relates to democracy, general theories, state building, human well-being, and so on. It's almost it's 840 pages and 38 chapters and 59 authors. So I'm quite proud of this book. This started for me in 2004, and this is the book I published in 2011 that is titled The Quality of Government, Corruption, Social Trust and Inequality in an International Perspective, published by University of Chicago Press. And here I try to do a number of things. I try to define what is quality of government, and I land on that it's actually something different than democracy. It's more about sort of the actual implementation, the state apparatuses, the state machine, which is something different from representative electoral democracy. Then there is chapters about outcomes of quality of government. One of them is titled Dying of Corruption. We were utterly surprised what enormous effect our measures of corruption have on population health. It's just stunning how bad it is. I defined it as something different from representative democracy. You can have a good representative democracy but low quality of government, countries like Botswana, South Africa. And then you can have high quality of government but no democracy. The main case is, of course, Singapore. What turns out that, as I found out with all this data, the main dependent variable for the quality of government operation is not politics. We differ from 98% of our colleagues in political science. We're not so interested in explaining politics, who wins election, or why our government form. Our main dependent variable is what can the government machine do for human well-being. And it turns out the measures that we have on quality of government shows that this is more important for human well-being than electoral democracy. Let me make it clear, I'm a big fan of electoral democracy, but electoral democracy without high quality of government will not deliver human well-being. And it's also very interesting. Most political scientists and political theorists think that it is democratic rights that gives legitimacy to government. Actually, it's much more important to have control of corruption, government effectiveness, and the rule of law. That is what people care most about when they decide if their government is legitimate. And it turns out quality of government, how people perceive the public officials that work in the government, is a very important cause for creating social trust and social capital. So then I wrote a book together with a research assistant who turned out to do so good work that she became...
Bo, just a minute.
Yeah?
Let's stay for a minute with the quality of government. Maybe go to the slide with the handbook. Thank you. So we have the handbook, and I did a handbook. I know handbooks, so I know that it's huge work. What is the most important achievement, or what do you like about this handbook, or what you are proud of? Of course, you presented the state of the art, but new insights that you learned while working on the handbooks. Few words.
First, I think that both economists and political scientists are paying a very high price, not paying enough attention to the state apparatuses, the civil service, the public sector. For example, political scientists, if they are interested in corruption, usually it's just one thing, vote buying. But most of the corruption doesn't happen in vote buying. It happens at the police, the tax administration, the land register, the social security system, and so on. And I think important is to actually have a precise definition of what is quality of government. And I
So
landed on the idea of impartiality in the exercise of public power.
Yeah. So between 2011, your first book, and this end book, what did change in your perception or your definition or understanding of the quality of government? Did you define it in the same way around impartiality, for example, or did you move?
The first article I wrote together with the colleague Jan Theorell, and I think it was published in 2007 or 8, title where we tried to define what is quality of government. And here we landed on this idea of impartiality in the exercise of public power. And over the years, I've become more and more convinced that this is a definition that works. It works, it has practical result. It can also be measured. So I think it's a working definition. It's just not up in the air. And I'm quite narrow with my definitions. Let me give an anecdote. When I was in grad school at the University of Lund many years ago, planning was the big thing. Urban planning, social planning, economic planning. And they stretched the planning concept endlessly. And then everything died when, I'm sure you know the article, Aaron Wildavsky published his legendary article, "If Planning is Everything, Maybe It's Nothing." So I'm quite narrow, precise with my definitions here, and I think it works. Then, of course, it's very fun to see that so many, both leading scholars, Alina Mungiu-Bipidi, Sherry Berman, Phil Kiefer, Francis Fukuyama, accepted to be part of this handbook and write very good chapters. And also we were able to convince so many young and promising scholars that this was a viable way to do good social science research.
Yeah. So maybe one chapter that you recommend me to read from the handbook, something that is, I know it's difficult.
I think the chapters by Alina Mungiu-Bipidi, the chapters by Francis Fukuyama and Francis Recatini. Then there is a very good chapter by 4 economists. Bigstein is the first name. And then, of course, my own chapter, which is about theory and definition of conceptualization. So, but there are many good chapters, and there is no chapter that I think you shouldn't read.
Excellent. So we can move to the second publication,
Okay.
and I have a few questions around it. What is the debate? I mean, you have your own quality of government definition. Who is offering, say, an alternative, a worthwhile alternative to your definition? Is there someone?
Of course. The main definition that is used, for example, by Transparency International, and I would say most scholars, is that corruption is abuse of public power for private gain. And in my word, it's an empty definition because abuse is not defined. There is the norm that is transgressed when we can say that something destroys quality of government and leads to corruption is not defined. And also, this definition doesn't differentiate corruption from ordinary criminality. If I steal office material from my department, I'm abusing public power for private gain, but nobody would call it corruption. So you can think of what we have done is that instead of defining corruption, we tried with the quality of government approach to define what is the opposite of corruption, which implies that what type of norms do we want public officials to uphold in order to say you are doing the right thing. So we circumvented the problem. Instead of, it's hopeless to define corruption, but I think we managed to define what is the opposite of corruption.
And this is impartiality.
Impartiality in the exercise of public power. So if you think about it, democracy is not about impartiality. Nobody enters democracy because they want to be impartial. They want to have more money for the poor, protection of animals, the protection of the environment. So democracy is a partisan game. However, when these policies are going to be implemented, a very different norm comes around. We want those who implement it not to just support their party followers or their family or people who pay them under the table or for what. So you have to realize that the good system managed to combine the partisanship of representative democracy with the impartiality in the courts and in the public administration. And here is a tension, of course. Here is a big tension.
Yeah. And did you produce a measurement of impartiality?
We did an index. We done an index of I think it's 10 questions that we have used a web survey to. I think we're now up to 100 public administration scholars, public law scholars in about 110 countries. And it works.
So tell me a little bit about this measure of impartiality.
Well, it's questions about how, if they have a task and they are there is some temptation. For example, if they're hiring people, should you hire people who have the right political agenda, or should you go for meritocracy? Or if you, so it's about 10 questions. I don't have them all in my head, but
and this is expert
everything
survey?
is in our database, and this measure works quite well. Yeah.
And this is expert survey across time and countries?
We only did it 2 times. It's quite costly and so, but it works. We did also other surveys, but this one works, so you can measure it. Everything is complicated to measure. But as my colleagues say, Søren Holmberg, if you can compete in figure skating in the Olympics, you can measure everything.
Yeah. So let me move forward and ask you on this kind of line on the screen now on your slide, which I think is really strong. You say that the quality of government is important cause for social trust. It's not the other way around. This is not the eggs that makes the chicken. This is the chicken baby that makes the eggs. Can you explain what's and maybe elaborate on the, say, theoretical and empirical basis?
Sure. Let me first say that we now have published experimental work on this, the most recent in American Journal of Political Science. So we can show the causality here. And this was a big debate I had when I started this with Robert Putnam, who thinks social trust comes from below. People are active in voluntary association. There is no micro-level evidence at all for this. How it works? We think it works like this. So people cannot really know if most other people in their society can be trusted. So they have to use shortcuts. Now, if you live in a society where the public health doctor, the police, the judges, the people who work in the social insurance business turn out to be discriminatory, corrupt, dishonest, incompetent, you will make three inferences. The first one is these are people who sort of have promised to act for the common good. If they just act for the private good, they are breaking a norm. If you cannot trust them, why should you trust people in general in your society? The second inference people make is people will realize that most people in such a country with dishonest, corrupt civil servants, public administration people, in order to get what they need, health care for their kids, protection from the police, whatever, they will have to engage in all kinds of shady deals, clientelism, corruption, and so on. And because of that, they cannot be trusted. And the third inference, people will think that, well, you yourself will have to, in order to get what you must have in life, you must yourself become active in such shady black market activity. And if you cannot be trusted yourself, why should other people be trusted? So in a short word, probably the Chinese proverb is correct. The fish rots from the head down.
And this is, I must say, goes in a way against most research, say panel data, world value survey that shows that social trust is the most important type of trust or fact or a very important factor that positively affect performances of government, economic, social performances. And this paper of you is really insightful and interesting to go forward. So governments are important.
I mean, it started that Robert Putnam recruited me for a comparative project about social capital in the mid-1990s. And I came to the same conclusion as him, that this is a very good concept. We can measure it. It has all the good outcomes. But I came to based on empirical research, I came to completely different idea how it's generated. It's not generated. There is no micro level evidence that people who are active in voluntary associations become trustworthy. So we stood there, we had I say we because I worked together with a number of colleagues. We stood there, we had a new concept, we knew how important it was, we could measure it. But the main theory, how it was generated, didn't work. I have enormous respect for Robert Putnam. He created this research industry, but on this point we came to disagree. Yeah. And he lost, I won.
Sure. I don't know if it counts you compare the bank accounts or the citations in Scholar Google. But
he beats Bob Putnam, yeah. I'm sure.
Okay,
well,
let's move.
I think he's worth all the praise he has gotten, but he's right on 3 or 4 things.
Yeah.
But the fourth thing is not working. I mean, I came to business schools and they started talking about social capital, and they said, "How interesting! But how do you invest?"
Okay. Invest in quality of government. Invest in impartial institution, which means also impartial people and culture.
Yeah.
Let's move to corruption.
Yes. Here I say in this book that you can question much of the relevance of political science when it comes to research about human well-being. There is a lot of scholars out there saying that it's representative electoral democracy that creates human well-being. This doesn't work at all. The data simply doesn't show. And this is, of course, a hard thing for political scientists to take in, because they are in love with representative democracy. And here I further elaborate this idea about the opposite of corruption. We also studied corruption in other disciplines, and how it relates to things like democracy, human rights, patronage, neo-patrimonialism, and things like that. And also I have a chapter where I criticize Acemoglu and Robinson, who cannot explain China. I think I can explain the Chinese miracle by understanding how the Chinese public administration works.
Can you expand on that? Can you elaborate on that?
The Chinese public administration is a special type of administration that combines two things. One is, of course, political obedience. It's very politicized, but it's also utterly professional, very competent. And the model they use is actually very similar to one of the most legendary books in public administration. This is Kaufman's The Forest Ranger, if you remember it.
Can you repeat that?
Herbert Kaufman, in 1960, he published a book, How Could the Forest Administration in the United States Work? Because all the rangers were out there in the field. How could they be controlled and governed from the central? And this is, before you used even telephones. And there are various names for this type of public administration. Some call it a missionary organization, the Y organization. I call it the Carter organization. It's an utterly efficient type of organization because it combines political loyalty with high professionalism. But it's governed not at all by rules and regulations, but by mandates, you can say. It would take me a lot of time to explain the details here, but it's actually also not a Chinese invention. I've seen it in Sweden. I've seen it in the United States. It's a very special type of public administration. It has one drawback. It doesn't work with democracy, because in democracy, when you get the new government, they want to do something different. But a Carter organization can't change. It's like a super tanker.
So the degree of corruption in China
is for the Chinese, right? They don't have it.
Yeah. Would you say that the degree or type of corruption in China is higher, lower, and how does it connect to performance in China? I'm following
corruption. I would say they have corruption on a mid-level. They put enormous efforts in controlling corruption. But of course, there could never be a corruption-free country. That would be as likely as a crime-free country. They have corruption, but the most interesting thing is this combination of high professionalism with high ideological steering. But I've seen it in Sweden, in the labor market authorities. I've seen it in the United States, in Kaufman's legendary book. And the problem with Acemoglu and Robinson is that they just throw up their hands. They have no way to explain the Chinese miracle. And that is, of course, unacceptable, I think. I'm quite critical of giving them the Nobel Prize in economics, yeah.
Sure. Please go on.
Okay. Here is an interesting graph. You can use databases like Web of Science and Google Scholar to see how often your work is cited, as you mentioned. But you can also use it for more interesting things, namely what is happening in the social sciences or in the scientific community. So this is the number of articles published on Web of Science, and we speak about 50 to 80,000 articles that have had the term corruption in the abstract or as a keyword. And as you can see, in the early 90s, it was hardly anything. 85 articles. It was completely ignored in the social sciences. At least in my part of the world, I and my fellow professors in sociology, political science, economics, we went through our whole basic education and graduate school without this issue ever being mentioned. And it's very interesting. Then you can see something starts happening in 2004, and today we're up to over 3,000 articles. So here is an explosion of research in this area. But the most interesting thing is it was completely ignored for such a very long time. And why was this? There were several reasons here. One was a theory launched by the very well-known political scientist Samuel Huntington, where he basically said, yes, some corruption is maybe bad, but some is also good because it greases the wheels, makes things happen, and these things probably even out, so why care? And then I also found out that standard neoclassic economics have a hard problem with corruption because they basically think that markets will take care of this. And I have news. Markets without a very strong state that can control corruption will not work. You will end up in South Africa or in Argentina or wherever. Development researchers, which is a big research studying international aid and development in my part of the world, they really didn't like it. They said if you start analyzing corruption in third world countries, you are blaming the victims. They were very much into this Marxist dependency theory, and now to post-colonialism, basically blaming the West for all the problems in the developing countries. I'm not saying the West is not guilty for any problems, but they completely ignore problems of corruption in developing countries. And then there is a funny case. I thought when I started this that anthropologists must have seen tons of corruption in their studies of tribes in third world countries. And they have. But they never wrote about it. Why? Because they have an ethical standard in their organizations that they should not report things that could be problematic for their informants. So they shielded this. Then I found some anthropologists who were interested in doing this, and together with one I actually published in the Journal of Anthropological Research that I'm very proud of. But until very recently, the anthropologists didn't touch it. They saw it, but didn't want to report about it. And of course, political science have been enormously concentrated on the input side of politics, on elections and voting and party formation and so. But most of the corruption doesn't happen on the input side. There is, of course, vote buying, but that is, I would say, a minor thing when it comes to the effects on human well-being. So, and public administration, interestingly, until recently, were also uninterested, and the public administration schools, I think they wanted to be like the business schools, and they didn't want to give public administration a bad reputation, so they didn't want to touch corruption. And of course, maybe the most important thing, there was no comparative data until the mid-1990s, nothing. So the only thing that existed was anecdotes. It's first when you get the very, very rudimentary data from Transparency International that you can start doing the simple, correlations and then regression studies. And then, of course, came the results that no matter almost how you measure it, corruption has the very detrimental effect on almost all valued outcomes. especially, I'm again surprised on population health. It's really something. So I think this is the case, and I think it's interesting to think why the social scientists sort of changed from one area to another. Today, corruption is a big research industry, but it was completely silent for a very, very long time. Actually, the legendary Swedish economist Gunnar Myrdal, when he wrote about India, he was among the first who pointed at this taboo, both among politicians and among scholars, to touch this. So we could have called the Institute for Corruption Research, but we thought that was a little sad. So that's why we named it the Quality of Government Institute. But it should also be said that the first scholars who entered into this was not political scientists, it was development economists. Many of them connected to the World Bank, Danny Kaufman, Phil Kiefer, and so they were the first ones who put this thing on the agenda. And I have enormous respect for what they have done, but I also thought, with all respect for their methodological skills, leaving the issue of quality of government just in the hands of economists is not a good idea. And we have worked closely with development economists, and they have been very, very good to work with, and several of them are in this handbook. So it is a little embarrassing for political science that we were latecomers in this. The most, maybe the dawn in political science and corruption research is my colleague in the United States, Michael Johnston. And he can tell you endless stories about how many times he tried to get corruption as a panel or a workshop on the American conferences. And people said, no, we're not interested. So things change. Yeah. And this is my final book in this area. As mentioned, I'm not going to write any big books more, so this is Controlling Corruption, the Social Contract Approach. And here I pose the question why almost all current anti-corruption policies has failed. The World Bank started in the late 1990s with a lot of anti-corruption policies, the European Union and so on. And the results on the ground are not impressive, let's say so. And one reason is that they have used what I call a completely dysfunctional theory for corruption, which is known as the principal agent approach. The principal agent approach was first used for understanding private companies. And the principal is the owner, and the agents are the people that are employed. And of course, it's a problem for the owner to actually get the agents to do what he or she wants them to do, because the owner wants more profit. The people who work for him, they want higher wages and lacks working conditions. So here is a conflict. And here it works, I think, because both agents have the same utility function. They are rational economic man type. However, if you move this theory to the issue of corruption, it goes astray. And this is for three reasons. The theory says the way to handle the problem, the principal agent problem, is for the principal to set correct incentives for the agents. So you should organize the incentive in structure. And if corruption was just an incentive problem, we would have solved it long ago. There is absolutely no lack of knowledge how to change incentives. It would have been a piece of cake, and obviously it's not. The second problem is what is the likelihood in a systemically corrupt country or setting that it will produce a principle, a head of state, that are public good, common good oriented? it's utterly unlikely. There are cases. Singapore is such a case, but it's very, very rare. What we should expect are leaders like Jacob Zuma or Kirchner in Argentina or Putin. This is what such a system will produce. So I usually say this theory is built on a ghost, an agent that is utterly unlikely to exist. And therefore, all the work that has been done following this principal agent approach has not succeeded. And it's also problematic because it says more control, more rules, more inspections. It's a very negative type of approach, basically seeing the agents as very dishonest persons who cannot be trusted. And this is not a good recipe for how it can work. So I try, and I built here on a very old theory, which is the social contract approach. In countries with reasonably low corruption, you can see that there is a very different social contract between the government and the state. Between the government, the state, and citizens. I would like to also, and this means that you cannot just fight corruption by fighting corruption. This is a line from Danny Kaufman, who was the head when the World Bank started its good governance approach. He says we can no longer fight corruption by simply fighting corruption alone. We have to change more in society. So what do I find? And together with colleagues, you have to have a functioning taxation system. We found one interesting thing. We're not only doing surveys, and so we also did anthropological work. So we sent assistants to countries like Kenya, Uganda, and Zambia to interview mid-level people, school principals, head of health facilities, not the elite, not the poorest one, and about corruption, how they viewed corruption. And so a couple of results that was interesting came out. One is they do not have a very different moral view of corruption than people in Denmark. Secondly, they very well understand that corruption really hurts their country. Third, then some of our field assistants were smart, so they asked questions like, but if people think like you, this is morally bad and it hurts your country, why are people not protesting more? And then came from many of our informants a very interesting reply. It's not our money. They hardly pay any taxes. They don't pay income tax, they don't pay property tax. So what the political elite doing with stealing natural resources or aid money is bad, but they don't care because they don't think of it as their money. And here you can see one of the lowest corrupt countries. They have high levels of taxation. I'm not arguing for very high levels of taxation, but you have to have taxation. Then we found that universal education and universal social policies have a positive effect. To my surprise, I should admit, but it's very clear from my colleagues, Lena Wegnerud, Helena Stensöta, that gender equality has a positive effect, whatever you control for. The more a country goes for gender equality, the lower is the corruption. And many people think this is a little strange. I say, open any prison system in the world and take a look who is in for serious crime. You will see that 94% are men. Most of corruption is illegal. Why wouldn't we see the same in corruption as in ordinary criminality? We also find good effects of meritocracy. And the last thing is, if a country has a professional system for auditing the public sector, that also have a positive effect. And all those you can see as signals about a working social contract for citizens. So yeah, this is what we have come up to. There could be other things, but maybe we didn't have enough fantasy or were not creative enough or didn't have data, but these are the 5 things we can see that have a positive effect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So let me ask you, before you move on, unless you have something else to say about this part.
I'm finished.
So let me ask you, so do you really say that corruption is just a symptom of a society where tax participation, civil society, universal education, gender equality, etc., are missing, that we have to go back to your book, Just Institutions Matter and Welfare State Matters, back to social democracy of the 60s and 70s?
I
Please.
I would also go for Christian democracy, German stuff.
You would go for that as well?
I mean, it's a state that actually serves its population with basic things that the population needs in a reasonably high quality way and fair way. And then people will say, well, we have a social contract. I get something from the state, then we shouldn't accept corruption. If you ask people in developing countries, they take a moral stand against corruption. It's not ingrained in their culture at all. But they participate, therefore they often don't have a choice. That's the only way to get decent health care. That's the only way to get your kids into good schools. That's the only way to get protection from the police, because there is no social contract. They say, why should I pay taxes? Look, I don't get anything from the state. I have to have my own generator to produce electricity. I have to have my own water pump to get water. I have to pay for my kids' education myself. So they lack a social contract with the state.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's easy to move to a social contract, but we can clearly see, for example, very strong effect from countries that early on went for universal free education. Yes, let me give you a number. We got, I and Eric Uslainer, we got data for, I think, 78 countries, mean months of schooling, free schooling from 1878. And it correlates with today's measures of corruption on a 0.7 level. It's just magic. So we can clearly see this is not make-believe social science. We can clearly give, maybe not proof, but good empirical indicators that these factors really have a positive effect.
Yeah. So what is the real suggestion? If you want to fight corruption, don't treat it as the cause, but also but the effect, and go with the Danny Kaufman idea. Yeah.
Yeah. That's how I think about it. The idea is Danny doesn't mention the word social contract, but that is actually what he was meaning when he launched this idea. You cannot fight corruption by just fighting corruption.
Yeah.
And it's also a critique
So
of the principal agent approach.
Yeah. And actually what you are saying also with regard to trust, controlling distrust, it's not about only trust. Look at the institutions, look at the quality of government, look at the welfare state and the social contract, right?
Yeah.
Go back to the social contract.
Yeah.
Okay, please go on.
I'm finished. I don't have more to say.
You have one more slide to go.
Yeah, I have one more. Yeah.
You don't have to.
First, what can you say about the future of this research? The first thing you can say, the corruption, call it bad quality of government problem, is not going away. There are a number of problems within academia for this. First, you have the public choice approach, basically saying that civil servants, people in the public administration, they are just like any economic man, and they moral values like impartiality has no meaning for them. Then you also, of course, have the post-colonial approach, saying anti-corruption is just a Western type of imperialism. This is completely wrong. The Afrobarometer shows that people in hopelessly corrupt setting take a very clear moral stand against corruption. And of course, you have cultural relativism, saying that it varies. What people think about corruption varies over time and place. It doesn't. If you look at we engaged a number of very good historians in a project from from the Netherlands and from England. And it's fascinating how when people talked about corruption in antique Greece and the Roman time and the Middle Ages, it's very similar to how we see today. And then, of course, we have the postmodernist, inspired by the French philosopher Foucault, who say everything is about power. The idea that you wouldn't use your position in the public sector just to empower yourself doesn't exist. And moral norms like impartiality and equality before the law, that is just nonsense. And then, of course, you have identity politics, saying that if you have a person with identity X, this person can never make a fair judgment of a person with identity Y. So there are actually a number. I thought when I came up with this idea about impartiality that it was not controversial. It's actually very controversial in the social sciences and in the humanities, which is a little fun. We have strong opponents that we try to argue with. So this is what remains to be done.
The way forward is via which way? What is the way forward in research on government trust corruption?
Yeah, I think there is no end to how much data you can collect. I mean, we could go down to the city level, to the region. For example, we have collected data on European regions. There are like some 200 regions in Europe. And here comes also some very interesting results when people are asked about how they experience quality of government and if they have experienced corruption and so on. In a third of the European countries, there are huge regional differences. Most so, of course, and here Putnam was right, in Italy. Southern Italy is bad, maybe not on a Nigerian, but well on an Albanian scale. But the regions in northern Italy are clean like Denmark. And this is, of course, very interesting. This has been one country with the same laws, the same constitution for 150 years. At that level, it gives you nothing. It's how the basic social contract at the regional or maybe even local level is important. So you could do much more such research. Then I would like the anthropologists to do research about this, to actually interview people, how they think about these problems in many developing countries, but also in Western countries. I mean, every country has problem with this now. Sweden, for example, have a problem with criminal gangs, organized criminality trying to eat into the welfare system in various ways. It's a significant problem, cheating the system and so on. And then we could come up with other things you could add to the social contract than the 5 things I and my colleagues have managed to put forward. There could be other interesting things that we simply were creative or had enough imagination to come by. And then we lack research about how people in the business community think about this. I have lots of contacts with the business community, but it's very difficult to get sort of really good empirical research here. And then lastly, I think it would be good if we could create much more collaborative research, interdisciplinary research about this. We need to work with economists, with historians, with psychologists, with anthropologists, much more. This is corruption is a multidisciplinary problem for sure.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Let me open the floor for questions from the audience, and not that I don't have about 20 questions ready, but let's give the audience priority. So who wants to come first? Anyone? It's always taking time. Reni, please.
I thank you very much for your presentation. It was very interesting to see a different perspective on corruption. And I live in the Netherlands, but I am from a developing country. So obviously corruption is a topic that is discussed a lot. And when you were saying that in developing countries, people have the same perception of corruption that they would in, I don't know, Sweden, I think you mentioned, in a developed country. I was thinking about it, and the fact that people kind of differentiate what corruption is a big thing, but that the small things that they do, like you said, because I have to get my kid to a good school, I have to get the medicines, I have to do this, or I have to do certain things, they don't consider that in general, as corruption when it benefits them, and they know that it is not 100% okay. So there is a kind of a moral judgment, but they don't consider it as the same level as the politician that did something to get a grant or a lot of money out of the government. That on one side. And then what that made me think is, I agree that all these things have to change, the education level, the social contract. But then for me, it is a bit of a vicious cycle, because if through corruption, you're spending all the money that a rich country has, because just to mention my own, I'm from the Dominican Republic. It's a country that produces a lot of money because of the type of industry that we have. However, it is a good part of it, it disappears through corruption. So if you don't have the resources in the country, because it disappeared, to create good education, to create everything that you mentioned, then how do we fix it? Right?
Both things you say are very important and correct. I build on work by a number of philosophers, Brennan and others, who wrote a book about norms. And they differentiate, they say there are two types of norms. One is moral norms, saying what is right and what is wrong. But then they also say there are norms as social practice. This is how we do things here. And this can come into conflict. Say you are, this happened to a close colleague of mine. You're out traveling as a researcher, you're a visiting scholar somewhere, you have your family with you, your daughter who is 12 gets ill, you have to go to the doctor, you ask at the research institute where you are, where should I go? They say, oh, we have a contract with a health facility here, no problem, you should go there. But then they also say, now you're in our country, and here it's customary that you leave an envelope with 50 euros on the desk of the doctor. Now what do? Of course you want to protect your daughter, right? So you do that, but that doesn't mean you think it's right. So this is the balance. There are norms as moral norms and norms as social practice, and they can be very different. The other thing you point out is utterly important. This is a major problem, not only in developing countries. I mean, people don't want to pay taxes, but because they cannot They don't get anything from the government, but the government cannot give them anything because people don't pay taxes. So it's exactly as you say, a vicious circle. I can just tell an anecdote. I was in Hungary starting this research in 2003, 2004, and I was with a number of economists. They tried to fix a German, Swedish type of pension system. But it turned out it was impossible because such large part of the Hungarian middle class simply distrusted the Hungarian state to handle those amount of money that would have to be collected in a responsible way. So they had already started to buy pension plans in Austrian and German companies. So they didn't want to support it. So it is exactly as you say, it's very easy to get in a vicious circle. And vicious circles are definitively difficult to break, but history shows it can be broken. I mean, if you go back to Sweden and Denmark in the early 19th century, they were corrupt, I would say, and we did a lot of historical work on this. They were corrupt not on a Nigerian, but well on an Albanian scale. And then came almost an avalanche of reforms that changed the social contract. So historically it has been done, but nobody says it's easy. No, but you have to start somewhere. Why not start with universal basic education, for example, of reasonably high quality? So how should I say? I'm not writing out recipes. What I say here cannot be used as a blueprint for every country. You have to know the specific country conditions. And I think, as my colleagues in medicine think, that there is general knowledge about many diseases, but no serious doctor would use that general knowledge without seriously examining the individual patient. Think about antibiotics. We know that antibiotics work, but you cannot give it to people who are allergic against it, right? So there has to be a balance here between people like I who try to come up with general theories and country or regional specialists. This is for sure. This is not a blueprint for how to deal with corruption. It's a general idea that has to be adopted very carefully to each and every country where it can work.
Thank you. And we have two more questions. We'll take both of them and then allow you to finish. Michael, please, and then Marcus.
Thank you very much. It was really interesting. And my question is, you argue that, if I understood you well, that the principal agent theory fails to capture the dynamics of corruption, because the principals are often part of the problem. And I was quite surprised because the first lesson in corporate law that we study in law school is regarding the principal agent theory. So I was wondering if you see any context or subfield where the principal agent theory is still relevant, or should we abandon entirely this theory? Thank you.
And Marcus, and then
I think it works well for private companies. I think it's a good thing for private companies because here both agents have the same utility function, right? The agents want to have higher wages and more lax work relations conditions, and the principal want to have more profits. And these are, you understand it. But in the public sector, the principal should not be self-interested utility maximizer. He or she should work for the common good, the public good. So it's a very different type of principle. So I'm not against the theories as such. I say it was a mistake when, for example, Susan Rose Ackerman, who was the first one, I think, started to use this theory for corruption, because there it cannot work. And it hasn't worked. Objectively, it hasn't worked.
Thank you. And now Marcus and then Sharon.
Well, thank you very much. That was a brilliant presentation. I really learned a great deal. I'd like to go back to what you said at the very beginning. about democracy plus low quality of government does not give a good quality of life. To what extent do you think that part of our problem with populism and the move to the right is really not just a problem with democracy, it's a problem with the quality of government?
It was easy to answer. I refer to my co-author and friend Jan Theorell, professor in Stockholm. He has used big data from varieties of democracy so to try to figure out what explains democratic backsliding. And most of the usual suspects don't give anything. It's not increased polarization, it's not low growth, it's not increased inequality. There are two things, he says in a paper, that explains democratic backsliding. One is large countries backslide more. India, Russia, China, United States, and corruption. That is what explains democratic backsliding. So yeah, I can send you his paper if you email me, or you can get in contact with him. I don't think it's not published yet, but it's presented at various conferences and so on. He's very good in this high numbers. So I believe it very much.
Thank you.
And you can also say, if you take Donald Trump and his election message was very much about corruption. He was going to drain the swamp, and Hillary Clinton was the most corrupt politician ever, and so on. So, yeah, there you have it.
Yeah. Thank you. And Sharon, last question, please.
Hi, thank you for a fascinating talk. I learned a lot. One question is, how do you measure corruption de facto? Not only perceptions about corruption, but how do you measure a corrupt country or levels of corruption? I know that Transparency International has the CPI, the Corruption Perception Index, but de facto, how do you measure whether a country is in fact corrupt or not?
Yeah, almost everything we as social scientists are interested in are non-touchables. It's so we cannot measure it in the physical way, but you can use expert surveys. You can use what people actually say if they are asked. Then I have a number of young colleagues who did a very smart way. I think they are as close to an objective measure of corruption as you can think. In the European Union, if there is a public sector, if the public sector want to buy something or construct something over a certain level of money, I think it's like 30,000 euros, that has to be a tender. And the European Union have all those tenders collected in a gigantic database. And my young smart colleagues, they analyzed it, trying to, and got data for in which countries are tenders won where there is only one bidder. If there is only one bidder, something is fishy, something is not right. And it turns out this measure correlates very well with the other measures. So if you're smart, I think you can come up with fairly good measures. There is a very good chapter in the handbook about the measurement problem by my colleague Nicolas Charon, where he goes through this. So I was very worried in the beginning about the measurement problem. I'm not so worried anymore because the measures we have, they correlate very on a 0.8 level, The problem is something else. The problem is, as I mentioned, if you have one number for a country, it can show very wrong results for different parts of the country, like Italy. If you give Italy one number, it seriously underestimates the corruption in the south and overestimates that in the north. And then you have the same problem in various sectors of the society. So you have countries or regions where the police is okay, but the healthcare is completely corrupt, or vice versa. So it's actually not a measurement problem. It is how fine-grained you can finance the measurement. And the more fine-grained, the better, of course. As I said, we think you can measure everything. The Department of Government in Gothenburg are measurement freaks, yeah.
Yeah.
Not I, but yeah, that's how we work.
Thank you so much, Sharon, and thank you so much, Bo. It was fascinating. We are over time, so I'm closing it. This session, fascinating session, even before we completed all the talk, and we got a little bit of Bo's work. The rest is there in the AI, in the Scholar Google, in the journals and papers and so on. And of course, the AI will tell you more about Bo's work and learn from Bo. So when you read the text from the AI, it's probably built on Bo's work. Thank you so much, Bo. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
all of you. I appreciate your kind willingness to take part in it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.